A lot of you hanging on. Let's go right to the phone calls. First up is Chris. He's listening in Minnesota. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Hank. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Hey, I just want to say I've been listening to you. I'm a pastor in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and I've been listening to you since I was at the seminary in Fort Wayne, and appreciate your show and your ministry a great deal.
Thank you.
Hey, I heard on a different show you were talking about creation, and I've always, from what I've heard you say, you're a staunch supporter of creation ministries and creation apologetics, but I heard you talk to a gentleman about answers in Genesis and their particular stance on things, and I just wanted you to tell me what your position is on the age of the earth and what Scripture says about that in the days of creation.
Well, I don't think that the Bible is intended to give us a chronology. That's my point. I think that all too often people look to Genesis for a chronology of creation, and I think they're asking the text to answer a question it isn't designed to answer. While I wouldn't say the book of nature is equivalent to the Bible, because the Bible is the infallible repository of redemptive revelation, Psalm 19 very clearly gives us both an aspect with respect to the law that's general as well as special. So when you look at the book of the law, you have special revelation. When you look at that which God has created, there is general revelation. But that general revelation is important for us in answering many different questions. So if you're looking at questions with respect to age, well, there's a reality that nothing travels faster than the speed of light, and that billions of light years separate us from the distant galaxies. Well, that would lead to the assumption that the age of the universe is measured in more than 6,000 years. There are other indicators as well. For example, star life. I think this is a very persuasive argument for a universe that's measured in more than 6,000 years. Star life depends on star mass. So a star like the sun has enough fuel to burn for an estimated 9 billion years or so. Conversely, and this is somewhat ironic if you don't understand the dynamics, but the fuel of a star half the size of the sun may last as long as 20 billion years. But the point here is that the universe is presumed to be at least as old as the oldest stars within it. And while biological history may be a matter of inference, I don't think astronomical history is a function of inference. I think it's a function of direct observation. Star formation can be observed in all of its stages. So you can look at the night sky and you can see a star in infancy, you can see a star in midlife, you can see a white dwarf star, as it were, that has burned out its nuclear fuel. And on the basis of that, you have some kind of empirical way of assigning age to the universe in which you live. But there are many other things that you look to. Sequential layers in the formation of ice cores in places like Antarctica or Greenland. They point to an Earth much older than 6,000 years. So I think that when you look at what God has created, I think that there's evidence that we live in a universe that's older than 6,000 years.
What is your view then of the days of creation? What is the purpose? What do you believe God is saying in those days of creation as related to the creation period and what he was doing?
Well, I think what you have here is a chirological view with respect to God's purposes in creation that become preeminent. And therefore, what you see, as I've mentioned many times on this broadcast, not a chronology of creation, but a hierarchy of creation culminating in the crowning jewel of God's creation, humankind. But this is one of the places that I would say that I take the text a bit more literally than a young earth creationist would. Young earth creationists posit that God employed non-solar light to govern the days until he created the sun, moon, and stars on day 4. But if you look at the biblical text literally, what does it say? There was evening and there was morning, indicating that the first 3 days of creation were normal solar days encompassing daylight and darkness. Now, the question is this now given to us so that we can have a chronology of creation? And if you ask me that question, I would say no. The purposes in Genesis chapter 1, just as the purposes in Genesis chapter 2, are different. And if you don't make them different and don't recognize that they're communicating purpose from a chirological perspective, not a chronological perspective, then you have the canard that's raised all the time. Well, how come there's a discrepancy between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 in terms of what God created first? Because if you look in Genesis chapter 1, you have plants and animals created before man. In Genesis 2, you have the inverse. But that belies a failure to be able to read literature in general. And so the skeptic there is caught in their own trap. They don't realize that Genesis is a mosaic. It is a masterpiece that is absolutely incredible. In fact, you can remember the themes of Genesis through the mnemonic device that is constructed with the 10 fingers of your hands. Just as we are called every day to have remembrance of the fact that God created all things. So forever emblazoned on our mind is when God created man and the animals on day 6, or when God separated light from dark on day 1. So we are given that in such a way that we can remember as we look at the created handiwork, we can remember the God who made all things and ordered them according to their own kinds. Be right back with more answers.